point which has got to be stressed. The fact that you are a religious person need not be, and generally speaking has not been, that you are a fundamentalist. Because otherwise, usually the arguments of most secularists are, if you're a religious person, therefore by that very fact you're fundamentalist, and this is false. I'm a religious person, but I'm not a fundamentalist in any sense of the word. And there are countless others like me, whether Hindus, Muslims, etc. So there are liberal traditions in every religion, and there are oppressive traditions in every religion. So what I'm saying now, and the first point is that every religion has the capacity to liberate individuals and communities, and has the capacity to oppress individuals and communities. This again is a fact. And if you study the history of every religion, you'll find groups that have been oppressed by them, just as there have been groups that have changed their religion in order to experience freedom and liberation. So the liberal tradition within any religion would be open to interpretations of scripture, would be open to a dialogue with other opinions, would be open to particularly an acceptance of pluralism. There are many other things, but these three things I think are important in our own context. Firstly, an interpretation of the scriptures. Secondly, a dialogue with other opinions, even if you don't agree with those other opinions, whether they come from within the religion or from outside the religion. So for example, Christian fundamentalists, as Mr. Gangadhar just mentioned, you have a group called the moral majority in the United States. Many of the television preachers are of the fundamentalist persuasion, and sometimes you hear them on Radio Sri Lanka, and sometimes on American TV too. Now, one of the things is that they bomb abortion clinics because they believe very fiercely that to abort a child is tantamount to murder. So therefore they say, we'll kill the murderers. Okay, according to their logic, so that they bomb abortion clinics. So they are not prepared, therefore, for any kind of dialogue in this matter at all. Absolutely. So the first thing would be, therefore, a dialogue with other opinions, an interpretation of the scriptures, and an acceptance of pluralism. Nevertheless, the fundamentalist point of view springs from a theocratic view of society. Now, this is a word which give me a little time at least to elucidate it. Theocracy is a belief that God alone is the ruler, and all of us are under God's law. And if this is so, therefore, what human beings can do is not to make laws of their own by a kind of human consent or majority consent, but just obey God's laws. And God's laws are revealed to you in the scripture. So any theocratic government has this as a basis and is not open to dialogue at all. So if you don't accept this, you are in error. I am not in error. I am righteous in this matter. So this was a state of government in most countries of the world, including Christian Europe, right until roughly the 17th century. A lot of Christians or Christian governments regularly burnt heretics at the stake, regularly hounded out those who did not believe in certain tenets of the scriptures. You're familiar, for example, with what is called witch hunting. Today we use it for example, we are finding out someone who is of another opinion, and it's called a witch hunt. But the actual historical witch hunts which took place in Germany in the 16th century were horrendous, where thousands of women on mere suspicion of being a witch were firstly flogged and then burnt at stake, because witch hunting. Today we use it for example, we are finding out someone who is of another opinion, and it's called a witch hunt. But the actual historical witch hunts which took place in Germany in the 16th century were horrendous, where thousands of women on mere suspicion of being a witch were firstly flogged and then burnt at stake, because they were supposed to be the spouses of the devil. You're familiar with the Galileo case, where the church proscribed the teachings of Galileo and asked him to recant and put him in prison. All right, so this is the background, the history of theocracy. Now today, most countries in the world are not theocratic. at least not obviously so. But there is a kind of going back to theocracy in certain parts of the world. We'll come to this in a moment. So I said, one of the things is law is based on revelation. It's not based, as we would say in a secular country, on reason. It's not based on anything which can be scientifically validated. That's not important. What is important? You believe. Faith is important. If you don't have faith, you get faith, or shut up. The second thing is that those who uphold this law are there by a hierarchical system, not by a democratic one. In a secular government, in a secular country, you choose your representatives, and though sometimes the choice can be faulted and it is sometimes defective, whatever, you have the right to choose them at different times. So a democratic elective process comes into play. In a theocratic government, that is not possible. It is hierarchical, which means to say a certain elite, and usually a religious elite, decide. In Christian Europe, it was the priests and those whom they influenced. In a lot of Islamic countries, it is the ulema. As we saw recently, 1 or 2 years ago, at the height of the Ayodhya questions, it was the sons and the mahants who came to the fore, and therefore who were strongly then contesting for leadership even within the VHP. So you see, at some time or other, when you get into fundamentalism, you cannot avoid the fact that religious leaders come to the fore and take hold of the whole movement. Now, these are therefore 1 or 2 points which I make about the nature of theocracy and how fundamentalism is related to theocracy. Fundamentalism, therefore, the strict adherence of what is revealed and as interpreted by a priestly caste for the rest. Finally, and last point, and I will be done. Why is it that fundamentalism has seen such an upsurge today? Just as I said, when we are at the end of a kind of scientific age. I put it to you, this is an indication of the failure of science and the failure of secularism. The fact that in so many third world democratic countries, these governments are slothful and corrupt. In other words, they have not succeeded in bringing about a just and an equitable society. In other words, secularists have entirely discounted religion and have, as it were, thrown it out of the window. And in parts of the secular world, like in the Marxist countries, the communist countries, the Eastern Bloc, it was even forbidden to be a religious practitioner. You could be put to death, and you certainly were a discriminated group in society. So this has been one reason why what you throw out and you try to proscribe comes back again through the back door. Also, we must remember that for thousands, especially in the Islamic world, the experience of the West has been one of oppression. I was remarking some years ago when the Rushdie crisis had just erupted. I was telling M.V. Kamath, when you're talking about it, I said, we had absolutely no idea how much this kind of Western liberalism, as it were, symbolized by Salman Rushdie, how much that is hated by the average Muslim. This is something which Salman Rushdie, in his own pride and arrogance, utterly discounted. Now, I think this is something to be taken into account, that the experience of millions of people in the third world, whether they are Islamic countries or whether they are Buddhist countries, whether they are Hindu countries, when they look at the West, which they call the Christian West, which is not the Christian West, but is the post-Christian West, because it is already secular and atheistic. They've got nothing but hatred for that. But this also is a reason why thousands of religious leaders say there's nothing that you can hope for from that kind of civilization. Their children are on drugs. They've got no future at all. Rather, come back to your own roots, come back to Islam, come back to Hinduism, come back to Christianity, come back to the Bible. This is one of the... Is that wrong?